I had a leader at one point characterize my team as the land of misfit toys. Digital is not just a function, it is a lever of the business. It is a lever for the business and, for their audience, their constituents. I'll be the first to tell you that digital transformation means everything and nothing. It is a buzzword of the last 10 plus years. If we invest X, we should expect Y in return. And I think that is where all too often these strategies, these efforts, these programs collapse under their own weight before they've ever really transformed. You hit the nail on the head. I think some of the biggest hurdles for digital transformation lie in policy. I still think we're talking heavily about AI from a service and support standpoint. How can we use AI to solve problems? As ugly as it sounds, I think for a digital transformation leader, for them to be successful, they need to really understand how the operational dynamics happen in any sort of corporate environment.
Welcome to CX Talks. My today's guest is a rare combination of technologist, listener, and a builder. Rob Scruggs has spent his career translating complexity into clarity, helping teams and organizations turn customer insights into real human-centered change. He's led CX from inside, strategy, delivery, tech, and transformation. And along the way, he's built a reputation for keeping customer trust at the heart of it all. Today, we'll unpack the moments that shaped his leadership, the CX trends that actually matter, and why empathy still beats automation. Rob, welcome to CX Talks.
Thank you, Avi. Thank you for having me.
Congratulations, on your top Global CDO 100 award.
Oh, thank you. You as well.
Thank you. So, Rob, would love to hear from you. A brief background, where you're coming from, for our audiences to understand, the richness of the experience you bring.
Sure. I started in this space about 25 years ago and was at a company that, believe it or not, at the time, this was the mid 90s, that did not at the time have an intranet site. And they needed someone to focus on that. It was the times intranet sites can be a little less glamorous than the website, the corporate site. So, right. And so no one was really raising their hand to do it. We did not at the time have a, web team. And so they just asked for, someone to volunteer to do it. And at the time I was going through a bit of a crossroads to say, what did I want to do with my life? And I, not to state the obvious now 25 years later, but just saw the whole internet thing taking off. And I just saw limitless opportunity. And so I raised my hand. And fortunately enough for me, I had a boss at the time who was incredibly gracious and supportive and allowed me to go to night school, sent me to night school to learn coding, basic design, things like that. I was a one-man shop, one-man team, and designed, developed, built this company's first intranet site back in the mid-90s, and just sort of realized that this was the space for me. I loved it. I loved every aspect of it, of where this channel could go. I also realized at the time, after several years of coding and working on the back end, realizing I was not that great of a coder. And so got into design, spent several years in design, realized I was not that great at design, and got into product. And so the pattern was I would dive headfirst into these different functions and really learn the trade, the craft, but then realize that, there's much more talented people who understand this space better than I do and are much better at it than I am. My kind of, talent really lied in pulling those folks together, right? Really understanding what the vision could be, working with other business partners for the organization and understanding what this channel could be on behalf of the business, and then orchestrating that, setting that vision, and then orchestrating that implementation with the right skill sets, the right functions, the right disciplines around the table, all rallied around the mission to serve that strategy. And so that's where my talent ultimately came to light, was really recognizing others' talents, connecting the dots between this channel and the broader business, and then orchestrating sort of the efforts, the investment, the priorities around getting that work.
And it's very interesting on what you just said in terms of what leadership has meant for you. Leadership is about recognizing that there are smarter people than you, and then how do you leverage them to deliver and come together for a common mission and then lead that.
100%.
That's very important. Second, what I like, I'm just drawing similes in in so many successful people like you. Second is, it's not always that you would find your calling on your first job you do. You always, learn from that and say, okay, now, okay, I've tried it. I've reached a certain set of competency, but let me now do something else. But each learning, each job has helped you grow into where you finally end up. So it might not be perfect in the first go, but it helps in that step ladder towards a career growth.
I agree 1,000%. I had no qualms about stepping back and realizing, I love coding. I love engineering. I'm just not, it's not my talent, right?
Yep.
I know enough about it, and that's the cliche, right? You know enough about, I've had every job on the team. I've been in a product seat. I've been in a UX and UI seat. I've been in an engineering seat. I've been in a consumer experience, customer experience seat. So sometimes I think that kind of coming up through the ranks experience gives you and the ability to sort of translate the work that needs to be done and aligning that with the broader business objectives. I had a leader at one point characterize my team as the land of misfit toys. I mean, creatives can be very interesting personalities. And I think being able to be the bridge between those incredibly talented skill sets and the broader sort of leadership team of what we're trying to do as an enterprise, as an organization, and the role that this team plays in it, that's where I have found my work to be more successful is bridging that gap.
But tell me this, so you've worked across banking, retail, and then now, most recently healthcare. What brought you to healthcare? Did you always want to, or again, it was a step function and you said, okay, hey, I can leverage my past skills now in healthcare.
Yeah, no, believe it or not, I pursued healthcare for 10 years. I've been trying to get into healthcare for 10 years and being based in Nashville, which is, a healthcare hub, if not the healthcare capital. I've had a really difficult time getting conversations in the healthcare space, believe it or not, because there is this notion that if you do not have healthcare experience, you can't get healthcare experience. And so my pursuit of healthcare, like most who jump into healthcare, was very personal. To me, I saw healthcare as sort of from a digital transformation perspective, the last great frontier. It's the last one to the table in terms of digital transformation. Financial services was tackling this 20 years ago. Retail was tackling this 30 years ago. I mean, this is really the last frontier in terms of opportunity. That's how I see it. And the other thing and it's very personal, and frankly, as we all get older in our careers and respective personal lives, to me, it's the one common denominator, right? It is the thing that we all need and we all need to succeed. And so, in my mind, if there was something in some small way that I could contribute to the space, to this industry from my experiences perspective, I wanted to do that, right? Because we all need it to be better. I don't think there's anyone who would say healthcare is in great shape. And so there's so much work to be done from a transformation, optimization, enablement perspective that we kind of need an all hands on deck. We need everyone to kind of contribute to healthcare and getting it into a better space. And so my passion lies in the fact that I just thought that with so many folks, needing healthcare to succeed, with how the world has evolved over the last certainly 30 years from a digital engagement perspective, and then combine that with the fact of how complex healthcare is to begin with, to me, there just seems to be ample opportunity to use this channel, to leverage this channel to make it simpler to engage with, simpler to
So
use.
let's break that down, right? So let's break that down in two pieces. You talk about digital transformation.
Sure.
And digital transformation has been a buzzword, and now AI is there and everything. So in the context of healthcare, okay, and then more specifically in the context of you know your recent role you had at Scan, how did it translate? So first, how do you see what digital transformation actually stand for? Because if you ask 10 people, they'll give you 10 different definitions, right? What did it mean in terms of what you were trying to accomplish in Scan?
You have to break it down. I agree. Look, I'll be the first to tell you that digital transformation means everything and nothing. It is a buzzword of the last 10 plus years. I think it's very specific and personal to each organization specifically. What I mean is that what is digital transformation for one organization is not going to be the same for others. You're spot on, and that 10 people are going to give you 10 different answers, and they're going to probably be wildly different answers. I think you have to understand enough about the business, where the business is going, what the business wants to be, what that aspiration, or appetite is for change. What is their overall strategy for who is the, what is the future vision for this particular business? And then backing into that with the role that digital can play in a very transformational way to help them accelerate that agenda, right? Both from a customer, consumer, member, patient experience, as well as their broader sort of business objectives. And I think you got to, where it gets into the nuanced piece of the definition for transformation is a lot of folks will replace some back office system or platform or tech enablement or something and call it a day. And we've replaced X number of headcount with this platform or this software or this tool or whatever, and we've transformed. And that's not transformation, that's optimization, right? I think you have to look at transformation and tie it to that broader sort of business strategy and where that strategy is evolving to, what the future of the business looks like, and how we get there.
And what was the challenge at Scan?
Scan was really, look, long-winded way of saying there's, most transformation strategies are multi-tier, right? Because the transformation remit is going to be layered in what our objectives are for solving the basics in terms of basic optimization for getting the fundamentals right of just day-to-day operations, day-to-day process flow, people process technology in terms of, what it takes in a most optimized state to run the engine, to move the business forward on a day-to-day basis. In parallel, there is the true transformation of what do we need to do differently tomorrow that we're not doing today that's going to fundamentally change the way we do business, right? And that's the transformation piece. And I think when you consider someone like a Scan who historically had not invested a lot in this space, digital was not a priority. They serve an elderly population. They were Medicare Advantage plan. There was, I would say, a misperception that their audience wasn't digitally engaged, which is not true. They are. You just have to give folks a reason to engage with you. You have to give them a reason to care. So to answer your question, the digital transformation strategy was sort of a multi-tiered strategy in the sense that we had a lane that we had the basics and the foundational items, the fundamental items that we had to get right to run the business. Then we had another lane, which we called our evolution lane. This is what we can do to get a step ahead. What's going to products or services, features, functions that we could create that would not just enable the experience, but frankly, ahead. And in terms of, the true sort of mandate for digital transformation and customer experience is to skate to where the puck is, right? And where's the puck going to be for this elderly population in the next year, 18 months, 2 years? And how do we learn enough about our end user, our constituent, to know what we need to be developing now that they're going to be ready for in 6, 12, 18 months. And we've built that anticipating their needs and really doing it outside of the box or outside of the way of thinking of, well, let's do it because this is what others in our direct competitor space are doing. Let's not focus on that necessarily. You certainly have to do that from a market parity perspective and competition, to make sure you stay as
So talk to me a bit more about that, because you raise an interesting thing, where you said typically you would think that the population demographics, which is now availing the Medicare or the benefits, are not digitally savvy, but they are, right? At the same time, healthcare and specifically, for that demographics, it's a very emotional engagement too. So what, if you can give us specific examples, how did you weave in that empathy or that emotional connect as at the center of this entire digital transformation?
Sure. The empathy piece, I mean, and I'm going to use the word easy and I'm, using it in air quotes, but the empathy piece is easy when you consider healthcare and just simply put yourself in that person's shoes, or frankly, just put yourself in your own shoes and imagine what would you want in this situation? Whether it's day-to-day care management and navigating someone's care journey. And we think about our own personal healthcare experiences of what, and just being in the digital transformation space or the consumer customer experience space, I think by nature, we have this innate quality to constantly be optimizing whatever experience we're in for the day, right? Whether it's going through the TSA line or it's going through the grocery line, whatever that is, we're constantly improving that in our minds and saying, well, they should have done this differently. They should have done it like this. Same in healthcare. And I think, for Scan specifically, it was when you think of it as it's a payer service, right? It's a health plan. You think of the basics of setting up and managing your day-to-day healthcare plan, right? You've got an online enrollment piece. So just using something very tangible like that example and saying, just when's the last time you enrolled in a healthcare plan? It's not as simple as it sounds. It's not as simple as signing up for your Amazon account or signing up for your Uber account. And so, but what if we made it as simple as that? Right. So there's that piece of it of, really consumerizing that online enrollment experience, much like you would in others in other industries who've really, perfected that space, the online enrollment space. The second thing is when you consider your audience and are truly empathetic towards them, imagine you going through an online enrollment process. Now imagine someone elderly, 65 plus, 64 and a half, getting ready to enroll in Medicare or Medicare Advantage. You or I might have difficulty with terms and language that healthcare providers, or healthcare payers and providers use, right? I think that's, again, going back to my earlier comment about the next last great frontier. I think healthcare still speaks to their constituents as if their constituents are experts in the healthcare space. And I think that's what's the irony of that statement of you have to have healthcare experience to get healthcare experience, especially in the digital channel, is it's just contrary in terms because
And do
imagine.
you think that is one of the reasons on why digital adoption or best practices from other industries have not really caught up in healthcare?
1,000%. I think it's the primary reason that payers, providers, systems, pharma, whomever have really kind of held off on how much to invest in the space from a consumer standpoint because they haven't connected the dots between how that engagement translates to what their overall objectives they're trying to do, whether from a bottom line, top line, sales, service, loyalty perspective. They haven't fully realized how to harness that engagement by building out a platform that is truly consumer focused, truly customer centric. And what I mean by that is that I go back to that statement of, for decades, and this does not win me a lot of friends in the sector, but for decades, healthcare has put healthcare experts in charge of defining and designing and developing these experiences for non-experts and then scratch their heads when they say, why do we have so many calls to the call center? Why do we have so many emails? Why do we have so much service related, operations related costs? And it's like, because you're still speaking to your users, your end users, your constituents in a language they don't understand. Financial services figured this out 20 years ago, 25
Yeah.
years ago. And until you tackle that, where you're putting on that consumer hat to really develop experience, because again, we were saying this in financial services back in 2005. People don't typically wake up and just can't wait to hang out on their financial services site or hang out on their healthcare site, right? But where they are hanging out is on Google, is on Facebook, is on Instagram, is on Uber, is on, you pick the consumer experience that is a, truly digital native, and that's where they're hanging out. And that correlation was so hard for the industry to kind of understand and comprehend because they would compare themselves to the next direct competitor. And we were hearing this back in financial services 20 years ago. They're not comparing you. When I was at JP Morgan, we used to tell, our other leaders that, they're not comparing you to Citi and Wells and Bank of America. They're comparing you to Google and Instagram
Yeah.
and Amazon. And so if you don't mirror or emulate those experiences from a user flow, from a workflow and a customer experience perspective, you're shooting yourself in the foot, right? And so
Let me
that's
ask you a hypothetical question. If Rob was to get, you know, unlimited power, unlimited budget, okay, and if you took like, let's say in this whole pair setup, any pair, right? You think, if today it's 20% automated, if someone was to look at it very fresh, it can get to almost 70% automated.
when we say automated, I'd have to put parameters on which piece of the puzzle
Okay,
or
let me, I think automated is not the right word. In terms of simplifying the entire end-to-end flow of a member experience. Like you said, because, there is a resistance, because there is not enough exposure, because there is, a legacy of how things are done. Okay. If you were to remove all of that and if it was a fresh paint, do you think, it's possible, to make the experience go by 2x, 3x?
I don't. Let me see. Let me try to answer it. What I think I heard. I don't think in our lifetime you're going to be able to fully automate a significant amount of the experience related to these more complex spaces like healthcare or financial services because you're always going to have a language barrier. You're always going to have complexity of terms. You're always going to have, because those two industries are so personal, because they have such an impact or potential impact on individuals' lives. And these folks are not experts at the end of the day. So there's always going to be, at least I believe in my lifetime, an omni-channel piece to that. You can automate certain aspects of it. Hopefully you've done it in a thoughtful way that keeps the experience connected. And you've done it in a way that also builds trust. Because I think if you don't build trust in the solution or the answer that you're providing, or in the step or interaction or whatever that you're providing, you've rendered the rest of the experience obsolete, right? Because they're not going to trust that channel. But in terms of, I think what people struggle with this channel, especially late adopters to the channel, especially healthcare, is that in terms of what the art of the possible is with this channel, not a lot of folks in healthcare, if any, have really quantified the impact. If
Mhm.
we invest X, we should expect Y in return. And I think that is where all too often these strategies, these efforts, these programs collapse under their own weight before they've ever really transformed. And then we look back and we say, well, what did we get for transformation? And, you see all these stats and various, assessments that say X% of transformation efforts fail. And it's like, well, define failure, right? Because did we ever define success for what we would need to see in this channel to deem it a success, to deem it an impact in a quantifiable way on the broader business? And I think when you go back to the earlier statement of, how folks are engaging in this experience, I think, starting with what their needs are, their behaviors are, what they need out of this channel from a fundamentals perspective, basic care navigation in healthcare, access to information, right? If you treat folks like consumers, because at the end of the day, we are all consumers, right? We're consuming information, we're consuming content, products, services. And so if you measure that engagement in a way that can be tied to the outcomes that you're trying to drive, right? And those outcomes being in some way tied to the financial metrics you need to see to say your investment worked. That's where I think people fall short. And I think that's where
Then, given all the regulatory environment, so I would love to hear your perspective on how do you balance personalization versus privacy versus regulation.
this is a one of the many things that keeps me up at night is that question right there. I think what healthcare could learn from financial services in this particular question or challenge is, and you hit the nail on the head. I think some of the biggest hurdles for digital transformation lie in policy, lie in regulatory requirements, lie, just because we are, and I want to be careful how I say this because I'm in no way suggesting that we should throw away, you know,
Mhm.
rules of regulatory or data privacy or anything like that. Not in any sense of the word. I'm only suggesting we should revisit the definition of terms that probably haven't been revisited in decades, of how we're using certain information to better the access, to simplify, the way that folks engage, to basically provide a more effective outcome driven experience through the use of data so that we can use that data in a way that better serves the end user. And I think if you can connect the dots, and again, this goes back to the fundamental challenge of the end user today being understandably hyper aware of how their data is being used. Being able to connect the dots with how we want to use that data to better serve you. And I think we have to revisit that conversation at policy. Like we have to go back and have policy, very difficult policy conversations around risk and regulatory compliance codes that were developed not for the 21st century. I think until we have, and I think that's where folks get
So then,
over.
what is your take on, because see, data at the end of the day is the backbone for anything you want to do to leverage AI. Correct. So if if there's challenges already on how do you use data to just even personalize because of needed and yet complicated laws, or policies and things like that. So do you think that is also impacting the progression of AI, and how do you see that? in
I
your
do think it's impacting. I think it's hindering. I think it's even not even just AI, but I think it's hindering how we can understand how folks are engaging with different online features, functions, platforms, so that we can use that information to better inform maybe offline experiences. And so, for example, from a tracking perspective, that makes everyone pause immediately when we start talking about tracking, right? But I think you have to really take a harder look at PII and PHI to understand how it's being used in this channel and within the organization itself, not publicly, but within the organization itself, to help connect the dots on behalf of that constituent. And what I mean, for example, is even outside of AI, just navigating someone's healthcare journey. I mean, think about it. I don't know any person whose healthcare journey is contained within a single system, within a single payer, within a single, like there's, our healthcare journeys straddle different systems, different payers sometimes, certainly different providers. And I think the fact that none of those systems talk, right? And so when you think about holistic care, which from a truly sort of 360 of your, care and well-being for, navigating your care journey, you would need data to be able to seamlessly move between these different systems, different payers, different providers that doesn't exist today. And so I think even just solving that fundamental issue, and I'll give you a very tangible example, me going have doctors at two different health systems. They know each other, right? But I need their data to talk to each other, and it doesn't. Do you know how the data transfers between the two? I'm asked as the patient to call that office and say, can you fax it over? We're in 2025
yeah.
and we're still faxing information over. We can talk about AI, but I think until we solve the fundamentals of a regulatory environment that doesn't support the sharing of data even between health systems, right, in a much more streamlined fashion, so that it takes the onus off of me to manage my own data, to carry it from A to B and to pick up the phone and call this person and make sure that they send it to this
But
other.
then tell me this, where do you see the future? What technologies, from an AI or a voice excite you? And in that context, how do you think the digital health plan will look like in 2030?
I think what excites me the most about the future is I am seeing more of the consumerization of the experience. And what I mean by that is I am seeing significant players in healthcare bringing in folks in charge of the overall experience, I don't remember who the payer was, but it was someone bringing in someone from a very large global retailer. Right. And that excites me is because that person gets it. That organization gets it, is they're thinking of that person was going to be put in charge of their overall end-to-end experience. And they most recently led it at a global retail brand that we all know.
Hmm.
And so I think things like that excite me. I think where AI, excites me more is less on the agentic side and more on, because to me, I still think we're talking heavily about AI from a service and support standpoint. How can we use AI to solve problems? My being an experienced guy, in digital transformation, my push to anyone in AI is to get them to think how to prevent the issue in the first place. How do we embed AI natively or more natively into the upfront experience, so you don't need to use it to offset call center volume, or you don't need it to offset operations, because solve the problem, mitigate the problem, right? By preventing it in the first place. And I think that's where AI and I'll give you a specific example. Go back to the reference of online enrollment and folks having trouble, like I have this condition or these attributes or these characteristics that I need to make sure are covered. How much are they covered? Excuse me. And does this plan cover it? Today, at best, most plans just give you a side by side, right? Some sort of quasi spreadsheet on the website that says, here's your plan comparison, right? But why not embed AI into that upfront process that, for example, in the online enrollment piece, using the data that you have from your call center that says, look, we know during online enrollment, 80% of our calls on this particular page or step in the process are related to these three fields. Okay, well, what are the questions that are related to those three fields that we get that are driving 80% of the calls related to online enrollment for this particular step of the process? And then embed what the answers are on the screen. Like never take them out of the workflow. Like give them something in line, when you've determined that they're pausing, right? Their
It's like a
cursors.
real time, what you would do for an agent, real time agent assist. It's like a real time customer
That's
assist.
right. We know because we're smart enough to know with our data from the call center that we have that we're not using to pull that up front to the online experience, to the enrollment experience to say 80% of the time, this is what's tripping people up. Okay, well, let's offer with the real estate we have in that experience something that gives them prompts to say, hey, if you're getting hung up on this, you might try this. Or if this term is throwing you, this is what it means. Or if this plan is what you think covers XYZ. Like give them something with the real estate and the information that you have in real time in the workflow that doesn't take them out, doesn't make them pick up and call anyone, but during the flow that actually empowers them to get through it. And I think that's where people are not thinking, more on the experience augmentation side of AI. We're still
Is
wrapped.
that the one area, where if someone was, many of our listeners are entrepreneurs who are looking for the next big idea, is
To
that
me,
an idea, you would want them to take?
yeah, absolutely. I can't tell you how many folks, AI, partners and entrepreneurs who approached me over the last 18 months, weekly. And I'm telling all of them, here's your idea. Here's what I need you to build because I can't build it. Here's what I need you to build. And I still haven't seen it. So I think there's so many ideas when you think of it, again, from an outside in perspective, we always wait for the problem to happen and then how can we optimize the solution of that problem instead of preventing the problem from the outset.
No, that's great. So it gives a great perspective into where healthcare is today, where it should be going, and then what do you think AI can do, to make it better for all of us. But within all that context, there's always people. Okay. So talk to us a bit about, the whole people aspect of your journey. You talked about how you pulled together, a band of misfits, or different departments, because what you're saying is need the people with different skill sets. How do you bring them together to a common goal, and how do you make them work effectively? What has worked for you?
Yeah, when I'm building teams, I typically look outside of the space I'm in. So when I was in financial services, I was looking for folks from hospitality. I was looking for folks from, tech first or digital first organizations, digital native organizations, hospitality, retailers. Again, consumer mindset. I would say it's very similar in healthcare. First, I'm not randomly picking folks. I have very specific attributes, characteristics, qualities that I'm looking for. I mean, obviously, you have to have the skill sets. I would like for you to have the skill sets in a complementary adjacent, industry, especially, where I start that search is with my own business leaders to understand, okay, first, here's our overall objectives. Here's what we want the business to be. That's the first conversations I have when starting an opportunity, when starting a role is, how do we envision the business in 3 years, 5 years, 18 months, whatever, because that helps me in my mind determine, from a strategy perspective, the role that this channel can play and how we were established this channel to better serve and enable the business. And then I build the team around those objectives, right? Here are the efforts that we need to be focusing on. Here are the type of skills that we need to have to be able to do that. And then complementary, from a complementary standpoint, I look for, depending on the objectives, if we're looking for online enrollment, right? If we need to overhaul online enrollment, I'm looking for folks, in that space in other industries who've tackled online enrollment or subscription services or things like that in a space that would be considered incredibly successful, easy to use, folks who've really, kind of shined in their respective industries doing similar activities. And then, there's also, I look for very specific mindset, personality, like
But
I
as a leader, what is that one skill that you think is important to make a team from diverse backgrounds hum together?
above and beyond any skill set, it's the characteristic trait of adaptability.
Mhm.
Because I think if you first of all, there's a couple of dimensions. Like number one, if you're coming into healthcare, I assume you have a personal mission for healthcare. That's a non-starter for me. If you don't, you're in the wrong place, right? You have to personally be aligned with the mission of not just the company, but the space itself, the industry itself, of needing this industry to be better. And if you're not, if you're not just incredibly passionate about the space, I'm not interested. The second thing is the adaptability piece. And I'm sometimes surprised by folks who are on digital teams or digital transformation teams who don't, live, eat, and breathe kind of change, right? Because if you're on a digital transformation team, you need to be good with a lot of gray area, right? You need to be good with white spaces and gray spaces. And gray spaces can be hard because that means you've got some form of definition of something that was kind of started, but maybe went the wrong direction, or the clay has just started to be molded, but you're responsible for reshaping it. And reshaping it can sometimes be a lot harder than a blank page. And there's a lot of pivots, a lot of, you need to be incredibly nimble. You need to have an aptitude and adaptability factor that's off the charts in terms of, I'm okay with change because that is in the definition. It's in our name. It's in digital transformation. If you're not of that mindset, you're on the wrong team. So
That brings us to our last round, which is the rapid fire leadership round. Are you ready?
sure.
What is that one book or podcast that shapes your leadership style?
Shapes my leadership style. I don't mean this to sound as negative as it probably will, but I think for every corporate leader, you should probably read the 48 Rules of Power by Robert Greene. And if for no other reason, to understand the dynamics of any corporate environment, right?
Okay.
That I think, it's really about, that book has distilled, hundreds, if not thousands of years of history into how people gain and maintain power. And as ugly as it sounds, I think for a digital transformation leader, for them to be successful, they need to really understand how the operational dynamics happen in any sort of corporate environment. And there are elements of that in the book so that you can recognize it, right? If someone is doing this, then I know I need to do that, right? In a positive way. And so I think a lot of people consider that book very toxic and very adversarial and things like that. And I don't read it in the way of using it as leverage, other than just understanding when you're being exposed to that type of behavior from others.
Well, that's great. Second, one tech tool you can't live without. Is there any specific app you can't live without today?
There's no specific app. I'm like most, I probably use the same couple of apps every day. And frankly, that's one of the benchmarks that I use with my teams and with organizations is, as we think about our digital strategy and journey, when you think about the tools that you use daily, how do we make our tool, our channel indispensable, much like your tool is, right? Like, how do we make our fill in the blank app the most important app on your phone, right? If you had to delete every one of your apps on your phone except for one, which would you keep? That's the mandate that I give to my team.
Which one is yours?
It's probably the news feed. I hate to sound, but it's that access to information, right? It's probably my Google News feed, things like that.
No, that's great. So, Rob, as we close down, what is that one last piece of advice, which you would want our viewers to take away, who are driving, digital transformation in various fields? What should they remember?
I would ask them to remember to think of this channel as not just a function, right? Digital is not just a function. It is a lever of the business. It is a lever for the business and for their audience, their constituents, and how to truly harness that channel for growth opportunities, engagement, loyalty opportunities in a way that's going to translate to quantifiable impact. And that's the difference there is, in order to elevate it from a function to a business lever, you really have to connect the dots for how this channel can be used to drive impact to the business.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Thank you for joining us today and sharing, your journey, your piece of advice, and of course, insights into what makes a good digital leader, specifically in the healthcare space. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Abhi.